Hello and welcome to The Art of Aging, a part of the podcast series from the Center for Abundant Aging in United Church Homes. As you know, I love having these conversations with others, and what we're going to do is look back on what this past year and what we've learned about what it means to age in the 21st century, how we encourage positive and empowering conversations that challenge, encourage, and inspire all to age with abundance. And in order to have this conversation about this past year, Ashley Bills, my colleague, is with me. Actually, you may not know it, but she's with me for almost all of the podcasts. She's usually behind the scenes, but today I made her turn the camera on and join me in the conversation. Welcome, Ashley.
Thanks, Beth. Happy to be here.
So to wrap up the year, I kind of went back and looked through our guests and some of the things that I remembered from the conversations or some of their answers to our 3 questions that we ask every single guest.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a couple things that stuck out for me. And these are in no particular order, but Jeanette Liardi, she wrote Aging Sideways, Rewriting the Story of Growing Older. And I had the joy of getting to know Jeanette last year at the ASA conference, and we worked on another project together. And there are a couple things, metaphors that she uses in her book that she talked about in the podcast that have really stuck with me. And the one is how she equates aging older people as being weeds. Has that ever crossed your mind, Ashley?
No, I mean, I would think that would be a negative thing, right? Because what do we want to do with weeds? We want to get rid of them. Toss them
Exactly.
aside. Yeah.
They're where we don't want them to be. And, we go out in the garden and we weed in order for the beautiful things to grow.
Yeah.
But in Jeanette's thinking, which I think is really helpful, she helps us to think about weeds as being resilient. They can grow where other plants can't grow. They're tenacious. Think about the weeds that are growing up between the cracks in the cement and the driveway, right?
Yep.
And in many ways, that's sometimes what it takes to age. And she has a saying that one person's weed is another person's medicine, and she lifts up chamomile as that example, and how different it is to think about aging from that and weeds for that matter from that perspective as a positive thing rather than something to be plucked up and thrown away, which is the general perspective in the larger culture.
Yeah, I love that idea of resilience, because I think that's something that we don't really attribute to older adults is that they are resilient people, just like those of us that are younger. And, we just, once you've determined to do something, it's totally possible. Even in between the cracks of the concrete, there's still hope in something, life there to grow into something better. So I love how she does that.
Yeah, and I really like the word tenacious as well.
Mm-hmm.
How many times have you heard somebody describing an older person as just they have their mind made up and they just keep going and going and doing what they're going to do, and some people might say that they're stubborn or that they have their mindset on a single focus, but that's part of tenacity. And I've often observed that perhaps that's a part of what has allowed that individual to live as long as they have, is because they have that perspective to just keep going, keep going, keep
Yes.
going. Another metaphor that she talks about is that we are master climbers, as a way of helping to get rid of another metaphor in the larger culture, which is over the hill. I'm going to confess something to you, Ashley, and the rest of the world. And I'm going to ask apologies publicly here, although I'm not sure he'll ever hear this, to Mr. Broker. And Mr. Broker was my band director in junior high. And some friends of I learned that he was celebrating his 30th birthday. And so we took a Miracle Whip container, turned it upside down, paper mache'd it, painted it green, took it in and gave it to him and said, "You're now over the hill. You're 30."
Oh.
Yeah. To my former, how old are we in the sixth grade? 12-year-old self.
Yeah.
Shame on you. That's ageist.
Little did you know where you would end up in the future.
Exactly. Exactly. So Jeanette talks about that metaphor and recognizing that actually all of life is a process of climbing up hills, sometimes sliding down and climbing up. And that in order to climb hills, you have to have experience, you have to have strength. Sometimes you have to have the right equipment. It can be helpful to have guides along the way. And that once you get to the top of the hill, you're able to see things that you couldn't see when you were down at the bottom of the hill. And so a part of the aging process is we can see things now that we couldn't see when we were younger, like my 12-year-old self and how horrible that was that I gave Mr. Broker a paper mache hill. Um,
Yeah, I love
and
that
yeah,
concept, though, the master climber, because it really challenges the idea that we hit a peak and then we just coast from there.
exactly.
Um, so it's not about aging isn't about stagnation then, it's about continuing to grow. So it's like, okay, now that I'm at the top, what do I see? What do I want to explore now? So it's sort of opens the idea that there's always something more out there to achieve and to learn and to climb or, what have you. I love how she frames that.
Yeah, and the reality is that sometimes going down the other side of the hill is as treacherous or dangerous as it was to get up in the first place, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes that you have to have different kinds of gear to be able to go down. So um, and that's a part of I think what makes somebody a master climber is both knowing how to go up as well as to go down.
Mhm.
So thank you, Jeanette, for those insights. And there are many more in her book and in the podcast, which we did earlier in the summer. Another one of our guests, and she's the most recent podcast, was Elizabeth Lika Loken. And that podcast is From Fear to Flourishing, Overcoming the Fear of Dementia. And very early on in that podcast, and when I asked Lika, how is it that she studied, that she ended up doing the work that she did, because, I had read her bio and she had had a couple of degrees in education. She was an artist in art education, master's degree in education. And she turned, I think about the time she turned 50, and she realized that she was really nervous about growing older and developing dementia. And for her, fear and curiosity are side by side. So when she finds something that makes her fearful, she allows curiosity to step in. And so that's why she started to study gerontology in the first place. And she was specifically interested in studying those who are living with dementia, what makes them, um, what makes their life fulfilling, how do other people treat them. And I had never thought about fear and curiosity being side by side.
No, that's such an inspiring approach, I think. Just the idea of turning fear into something that leads to greater understanding. And I like that she found a way to connect to humans first rather than focusing on the illness itself.
Yeah, excellent, excellent point.
Mhm.
And she talks about, she even uses the hand motions when you go to see a scary movie and you put your hand over because you don't want to watch it, but then you want to peek to see what's going on. It's not a good analogy for me because I really don't like scary movies, but
Either.
I am really intrigued by that fear and curiosity go side by side.
Mhm.
And Lika is the founder of Opening Minds Through Art, a program that's arts based through Scripps Gerontology Center at Miami University of Ohio. She's retired, and since she's retired, she has taken a course to train people to be death doulas. And when I asked her to tell me about the death doula, she said it's the same thing. Now that she's at this point in her life, she's afraid of dying. And so she thought, well, I'll go and curious about what this death doula thing is. So I'll go learn about dying. And she said, I don't know that she hasn't at this point. She said, I don't know that she's going to practice as a death doula, but when she comes up against things that cause her fear, she just dives in and says, okay, I'm just going to learn more. So that's just, I find that very inspiring.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the definition of fearless, right? Being able to really dig deep into some of those things that we're afraid of and see what they reveal. And I think, we had the pleasure of meeting Lika, and from what she spoke about at the symposium this year was that it really led to more compassion and understanding, which I think is just so cool. Like how many things are we missing out on in life because we're afraid to really dig deep into them?
Yeah. And as an artist, her emphasis on understanding that, particularly with those with dementia, how do we connect with other people beyond words,
Mhm.
um, and how whatever medium that takes, however we can see the deep humanity in the other person is so important.
Yeah.
Another uh, podcast guest from earlier in the year is Erin Marzella. Her podcast is Aging Differently, Embracing the Struggles of Older Adults. And she talks about the fact that as we age very differently, which is not a new concept to me.
Mhm.
But the way she talked about it was just really intriguing. And she said she, lifted up the fact that almost all human beings learn to walk roughly around the age of one, um, give or take some weeks, maybe a couple months for those who are precocious before, as those who need a little more time after. Um, but we, as human beings, we all walk relatively, start at the same developmental stage, but we don't all stop walking at the same point in life. And she talks about our walking span. And so the challenge is, and Erin works with organizations to help reverse engineer challenges for older adults, and how can we help to meet those challenges, not necessarily just individually, but through the structures and organizations and policies. And she tells the story about in her own family when she was small, all of the individuals who were older than her parents had dentures, both upper and lower dentures. And so she, in her young development, thought everybody who ages loses their teeth, and everybody has to get dentures. Until her mom reminded her, or helped her to learn that no, if you brush your teeth and you go to the dentist twice a year and you take care of your teeth, aging doesn't mean that you have to lose your teeth. And how do we think about some of those assumptions we make about later life, um, and challenge the one size fits all to
Yeah,
growing older?
it's like those generational curses,
Yeah.
being, in Appalachia, where I'm located, poverty is one of those things. Everybody thinks, "Well, I'm just gonna have to be poor because my family's poor, and I'm gonna work on the farm because my grandpa worked on the farm," but you don't have to, you can do things differently. And so I really like that she's kinda challenges, things don't have to be like they've always been. You can kind of step outside by making some changes, instead of setting yourself up for maybe complications later. So I really like that perspective.
And I think it's also really helpful. because we need to be thinking about our own aging selves
Mhm.
much earlier in our life than most of us do.
Yeah.
And it's
Well,
okay if you don't think about your aging self until you're 75 or 80, but there are things choices that we can make earlier in our life that can definitely affect the quality of our life when we are older adults ourselves. And so, how do we kind of do some of that reverse engineering? So, um, I have a friend who saw recently, and he's lost about 15 pounds. And when asked, what prompted this weight loss, he said, well, he realized that, and he's known this for, I don't know, 20 years or so. His father died of um, complications because of diabetes. Um, but suddenly, when the doctor says you're pre-diabetic, the dots kind of connected in his brain, and he realized, okay, there are things I can do now. I don't have to experience what my father experienced. There are things that can happen now that can change that for
mhm.
me. And that's both in terms of individual choices we make, but there are also larger social choices that we can make that are going to change the way people who are younger today are going to age when they're older.
Right. And how can we be more empathetic to the varying needs of those who are older? Like I think about, when she mentioned a child learning to walk, nobody's judging anyone at that point, and thinking, gosh, they need to be walking by now. It's just like, oh, it'll come. Everybody gets there, and everyone's very understanding. But then
Yeah,
on the other end of age, are we really that understanding and empathetic to the needs of older adults?
yeah. And we all make assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Not everybody who's in their 80s needs help going upstairs or has
Right.
to give up their car keys because they shouldn't be driving. But yeah, yeah. Another one of our guests that was more recent was Dr. Cotronelle Trump, and her podcast is Creativity and Aging and Embracing Constraints. And Cotronelle was the keynote speaker at our symposium about the power of creativity. And it was such a joy to work with her and to learn more about her. Um, and in the podcast, she talks about one of her early hypotheses in her own academic career, in which she calls the green eggs and ham hypotheses, and recalling that um, I can never remember Dr. Seuss's real name, Theodore, his last name is. The publisher said, create a children's book that uses no more than 50 individual words. And so that's how we have green eggs and ham. And how those constraints, if those constraints hadn't been there, green eggs and ham would be different. It would be perhaps a different story. And she talked about this then also more at the symposium. But this idea that constraints actually can be a catalyst for creativity. I've heard more people talking about how that concept is really um, lingering and bouncing around in their head as they think about all kinds of different situations and scenarios in their lives.
Yeah, she really flipped the script, I think, talking about that at the symposium. And then when I listened to the podcast, instead of seeing those limitations and just giving up and turning back the way you came or whatever it may be, she shows how it can drive new forms of expression and creativity, and how that's not it's not a stumbling block. It's not a place where we um, stop being creative. You just find a way around it. I think I shared with you, Beth, that I've even used it on my 17-year-old. It's funny how it applies so much. It's like, well, if that's a problem, let's figure out another way, instead of giving up. And it really leads back to that resilience you were talking about early on, and how we are those resilient weeds that are not going to give up. We're not going to give up because we run into a wall. We're going to go around it and figure out another way. And so I just loved her whole presentation on constraints. I thought that was so creative in itself.
Yeah. And stay tuned, friends. Um, her presentation at the symposium was recorded, and that'll be made available to those who registered for the symposium here shortly in the new year, and then later in 2026, and that'll be available on our website as well. So we could go through all of the podcasts for the year, but we don't really have enough time. And um, but we do ask 3 questions of every single guest, and I went through and listened to some of the answers to those questions. And so the first question that we ask them is, what is it about you as you have aged that has surprised you and that you like about yourself? And this one, I think, has the most interesting spectrum of answers. Kelly De La Roca in Creativity Has No Age, that was the podcast, name of her podcast. She talks about how what has surprised her as she has aged is bravery. That, in her 50s, she had an idea and she was brave enough to go and explore it. And now she has this organization called Poem Renovation, which is doing all kinds of very interesting things in a wide variety of contexts, including with older adults who are also living in community. Um, and it's just an inspiring narrative of transformation. And she also talks in relation to this question that she likes that as she ages, she has passion and drive. That this motivation to start something new has proven that she can be creative and she can continue to learn and she continue to evolve. Um, she's learned more about printing. What do they call that when you print with plastic?
Oh, the 3D printing.
3D printing. She's learned more about 3D printing as she's working with another individual who's actually making plastic tiles of words from the poems that are used for poem renovation. So um,
I love
she,
that there's a common theme here, right? In that
yeah,
people are feeling more creative, more resilient. And she talks about how aging is more like a springboard rather than a finish line or time to slow down. It's accelerating for Kelly. And so
yeah,
I
yeah,
just find that so inspiring, especially as a middle-aged woman looking forward to the future. Like, things don't have to slow down. They can actually ramp up, or there could be so much more possible, as you age and as you have
yeah,
more knowledge and so on. So
yeah.
yeah.
And then Cheryl Wayland in the podcast Making Inclusivity Meaningful for LGBTQ plus elders. Um, throughout the podcast, she's talking about the unique challenges facing LGBTQ plus elders. And I believe her podcast is the first podcast I have done where I thought, oh, man, that Kleenex box is way on the other side of the room. I really need to be closer. So I invite you to listen to it. That was recorded in March of 2025. But specifically in response to this question about what has surprised you about aging that you like about yourself, um, she talks about how she really is a caretaker, a caregiver, and that's not necessarily something that she would have seen about herself previously. But as she has aged and as she has had the opportunity to be with other people, that's really become a part of her identity of who she is and how she expresses care for others. Um, and in her podcast, she also emphasizes how inclusivity is not just a buzzword, but it is necessary in creating spaces for all older adults, but particularly for those who are LGBTQ plus, in order to be able to thrive. And There was another great conversation and a great podcast.
Yeah, it's I think we often overlooked the needs of older adults. But it's so important to make sure, and I know we all know this and we say it, but I feel like you can't say it enough, that everyone is seen, feels valued, regardless of their identity or situation, because we want everyone to experience all these good things we're talking about, not just for some people.
Yeah, and with the LGBTQ plus community, it's really important for us to have some basic understanding of what they have experienced throughout their 7, 8, 9 decades of life. And that's not any different from us having an understanding of anyone, what they've experienced in their lifetime. But particularly for those in this community, um, the amount of hatred and discrimination and fear that have been both the undercurrents and the very specific hanging over their head for their own personal safety, for their economic security, for their ability to live where they want to live, definitely affects how they age, their health and their
Mhm.
physical health, their mental health, spiritual health in later life. So yeah, yeah. And then I was able to convince my friend Margaret McDonald and to be on the podcast. And her podcast is Aging is Living, Changing the Narrative. And in answer to this question, what has surprised you about aging? What do you like about your aging self? She talks about becoming comfortable with the changes that come with aging. And Margaret and I have had many conversations over the years, the past 6 years or so that we've known each other. Um, but in the podcast, in particular, in relation to this question, she talks about she likes the gray hair, she likes her wrinkles, the new jawline, and specific, and that we need to look at these things as an invitation how we think about aging, not as a loss of beauty or vitality, but as a natural and powerful process of self acceptance and understanding. And she confesses as she begins that to answer that question. She said early in her life she was very much concerned about how she looked to the outer world, and as she's aging, she's embracing those changes. And along with that, she also talks about the fluidity of identity and her personal growth, and she has been inspired by the research that's been done about neuroplasticity and the brain, particularly as we age. And kind of getting back to an earlier theme you mentioned a little while ago, Ashley, about how we can grow and change in our later years, and that's something that we can all look forward to.
Yeah, I love this one because being 42, I think nearly all my friends have Botox or some sort of filler in their faces. And it is so frustrating. It's like, what happened to just aging naturally?
Yeah.
To Margaret, I just want to say it louder for the people in the back, because I feel like we're not getting that across very well, because there's so much about, like, the culture says is not okay about aging, that you should color your hair, that you should, get filler and bring those cheeks back up where they're supposed to be, and I'm like, what's wrong with aging? Like, I feel like God didn't make mistakes, right? And so he created us all the way we are, and aging's a part of life. And why not embrace the beauty of the change? And so I just love what she's saying here. And I feel like I need a megaphone for everyone I know. Like, just stop and age naturally.
Yep. This is your call to action, Ashley, to
Yeah,
be an aging advocate.
that's
And
right.
yeah, yeah. And we do need to be having these conversations younger than we are. This isn't
Mhm.
just about folks who are 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years old.
Right.
Another more recent podcast was with Susan McFadden, who was also one of the presenters at our symposium. And that podcast is Memory Cafes and Mindful Moments. And she talks about memory cafes. I think we talked about the memory camp that she and her husband John started, and they do in the summer. She talked about the Spark Alliance, which is a program in museums that she helped to institute. I think we may have talked about dementia friendly. Um, and when asked this question, what has surprised her and that she likes about herself, is she was reflecting about the fact that she's been an academic her entire life and that she really likes being engaged in these creative experiences and that relational mindfulness of being present with those who are with us um, is really important to her and her own aging. Um,
Yeah, there's
yeah,
so
so
much to be said about, you know, s like, doing the work and then actually physically being involved in the work that you're
yeah,
doing,
yeah,
and so I think it's a valuable lesson for all of us that, and what she was talking about at the symposium is it's not about managing the body as much as it's about managing and nourishing the soul as well. And so I love how she really felt more herself when she got involved in those communities herself with her
yeah,
husband. And so I
yeah,
just love that, actually having a hands-on experience and how that really nourishes the mind, body, and soul.
yeah, yeah. We had the joy of having a conversation with Leanne Clark Shirley, the president and CEO of ASA, and her podcast is called The Relentless Pursuit of Good. And when asked what surprises her about her own aging process that she likes, um, she talked about how she's aware when she looks in the mirror that she is seeing the face of her grandparents and recognizing her grandparents. And it's a tender moment that really connects that generational cycle of aging. And not all of us knew our grandparents. They didn't live into later life. And so that in and of itself is a blessing. Um, and then the other piece is that she talked about the relentless pursuit of good, and how aging can lead to a renewed sense of purpose, um, and that she is committed to changing things for the better as she ages and challenges us to think about the role of aging adults. So, just what we were talking about.
Mhm.
Um, it's just what you were talking about, Ashley, about
Yeah.
committing to help changing things for not only yourself, but
Mhm.
those who are closer in age and life circumstances you are.
Yeah. Staying actively engaged, and making a difference along the way. I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And actually, the first podcast that we did this year was with Mary Petrosky, and that podcast is called Shifting Priorities and Aging. And when asked what surprised her about her aging that she really likes, one of the comments was the change in perspective and priorities in her own life. And she talked about her desire to become a citizen rather than a consumer. Um, and this aligns kind of similar perhaps to a little bit of what Leanne was talking about and thinking about aging as a time for giving back and contributing to society, embracing a deeper sense of connection with others. Um, and I really appreciated that shift from consumer to citizen.
Yeah.
And then she also talked about becoming more fun and engaged. Um, that aging has made her a more enjoyable and grounded person, and and she she shifted. She's worked in aging services for many years, but her work now with the Akron Art Museum and their Studio 55 is, I believe, the name of the program, that it's more fun, and she's just so passionate and engaged about that program. It was very cool.
It's awesome.
The second question that we asked, what surprises you about you that you're doing at your age right now? Um, Daphne Johnson in the podcast Finding Hope and Connection, the Power of Community Dementia Support. Daphne's the person who is the founder of the organization called Respite for All, and it's a model a replicable model for congregations to be offering respite care for individuals and their caregivers who are living with dementia. And I think Daphne's was another one where I kind of wish I had the Kleenex box nearby. And the thing is, I've heard Daphne tell the stories she told before, and they still bring tears to my eyes. But in response to this question, um, she talked about what surprises her about the age she is now is how much really God is working in her life. And she said, if I would have told myself 10 years ago all that I would have been able to do, I would not have believed it. And she talks about how many lives have been changed because they've been involved in this, how many volunteer hours, how many congregations, how many states Respite for All is in right now. And it Daphne's a woman of faith, and even being a woman of faith, she said 10 years ago she never would have expected what all God would be accomplishing in her life, and it's a real joy for her.
That's awesome. And thinking about what we were saying a moment ago about shifting perspectives, from being a consumer. A consumer just sits and lets things happen and ingests things in life. But being a doer and being involved as a citizen, look at what change can come. And being a believer myself, I love that she gives credit to God working through her life. And so it's awesome what can happen when we just get off of our seats and actually engage in the community that's around us. So
Yeah, yeah.
good for her.
And the last question is, who is a person in your life who is an abundant aging influencer? Or another way to say that is, have you ever looked at someone and said, I want to be like them when I'm their age? And in throughout all of our guests, there are several who mentioned their mothers, several who mentioned grandparents. Um, but I just wanted to lift up the answers from Stu Maddox and Joe Applebaum. Their podcast is Driving Social Change Through the Power of Documentary Filmmaking. Um, and Stu said Colonel Sanders, and it just cracks me up. And but it's true. And I don't know if you know the story about Colonel Sanders, but he really didn't start his chicken business until he was in his 60s. And now we have KFC. The headquarters are not far from his original restaurant in Louisville, Kentucky. Um, and then and Sue, said just like Grandma Moses, who started painting in her eighth and ninth decade. Um, that's who he wants to be as he ages. People who are really kind of just starting. And Grandma, I don't. I've been to Colonel Sanders' original restaurant, and I lived in Louisville. I don't completely remember all the details of his story, but Grandma Moses actually did needlework, embroidery her entire life. And when she was in her 80s, late 80s, because of arthritis, she couldn't do that fine work anymore. And that's when she picked up a brush. And again, this goes back to Catronelle Trump's constraints. It creates
Mhm.
creativity. Um, we don't know Grandma Moses because of her needlework. We know her because of her painting. And that painting came about because of the constraints, her physical constraints of the arthritis affecting her body. And I
Wow.
like Stu, inspired by those stories. And Joe named a woman that he knows who's in her 80s, who's very engaged in daily yoga and goes to meetups. And several of the other guests also um, mentioned specific individuals that they know. I don't think Stu knew Colonel Sanders personally, but Susan McFadden named a woman from her congregation. Um, and the reality is, we all need mentors and teachers and guides um, who can help to influence us at whatever age we're in, um, to help our aging process so that we can be like those individuals when we are whatever age they are.
Absolutely, because I think we all want to be someone's abundant aging influencer, right? Like I want to be that for my grandchildren and their
Exactly.
grandchildren. And so having somebody to look at to kind of to mirror the things that you like and see, I think is such a good exercise.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, for those who haven't known grandparents,
Mhm.
who don't have extended family members who necessarily lived into later life, um, it doesn't have to be a family member, and sometimes family members don't live close. So who are those individuals who are around us in our communities and our neighborhoods who can serve that for us? Can be really important.
Yeah, there's a an acquaintance of mine who I went to church with him and his wife, and I didn't really know them very well, but they were always around, and he took a liking to some of the same interests I did, and he just started talking to me here and there at church. Well, then he moved into actually a United Church Homes community near where I live, and I don't know how he got my number, but he started texting me, happy birthday, Merry Christmas. And I thought it was so sweet of him to think of me, when honestly, I didn't give it much thought about him, being busy, and I just thought we just had a regular relationship. But he obviously saw it as something more important. And then it made me feel guilty not taking it so seriously. But I've always been so touched by that. And he still texts me. He texted me for my birthday this year. I'm sure I'll hear from him at Christmas. And now I have his number and I'm trying to do the same thing. And so it's that mirroring of those influencers. But I just love like how, it doesn't have to be a grandparent or somebody in your life.
Right.
There's so many people around us that are aging abundantly that we can really take note of what they're doing well and apply it to our own lives.
And hopefully, when you are his age, you will be engaged on a daily basis with newer technologies like he
Yeah,
is with texting and email that,
right.
which
Hard to tell what it'll be then.
right, in the scheme of in the length of his life have not been around for that many years. So
No.
yeah.
Yeah, very cool.
Well, thank you, Ashley, for joining me on camera today and for working behind the scenes for all the other ones. Thank you to our listeners for your time, not only with this episode, but with the other episodes through the years. Part of United Church Homes Abundant Aging series, The Art of Aging. We are looking forward to more episodes coming in 2026. If you'd like to participate in additional conversations around aging abundantly, you can visit us at abundantaging.org. And in the meantime, may you look around you and identify a person who is aging ahead of you, who influences your understanding of how you can age abundantly by their aging example. May you enjoy the end of the year and the holidays, and may you have joy moving within your life in the coming year. May you age abundantly.